My name is Julia, and I'm 32 years old. I'm sitting in my quiet Chicago apartment holding a faded photo of my family outside our old bakery. That place was my heart, my childhood, my everything. 2 years ago, I gave up $5 million, every penny I'd saved, to save it from collapse. But instead of gratitude, my parents' cold words echo, "Don't come back." How does love turn so cold? Have you ever poured your soul into family only to be pushed away? Share where you're watching from below. And if this resonates, please like and subscribe to hear how I found my way through. 2 years ago, I stepped off a plane in Chicago, my suitcase rattling behind me, nerves buzzing like a summer storm. I was 30, then a tech consultant, with a life I'd built far from home. The family bakery, a cornerstone of our suburban neighborhood, was the reason I came back. My parents had called me the week before, their voices thin and strained over the phone. They didn't say much, just that things were bad and they needed me. I hadn't been home in years, not since college pulled me away and ambition kept me there. But family is family, right? I booked the first flight. The bakery's sign, once a bright red beacon, was faded when I pulled up. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a couple of old cars baking in the July sun. Inside, the air was heavy with the ghost of flour and sugar, but something was off. The counters were cluttered, the display case half empty. My parents, Margaret and Robert, were waiting in the back office, a cramped room stuffed with papers and stale coffee cups. They looked older than I remembered, their faces carved with worry. My mother's hands twisted a dish towel, and my father's shoulders slumped like he was carrying the world. We sat around a wobbly table, and they laid it out. The bakery was drowning in $7 million of debt. A botched expansion, bad loans, and years of mismanagement had gutted it. This place, started by my grandparents, where I'd spent summers rolling dough and sneaking cookies, was weeks from closing. My mother's eyes were red, and she kept glancing at my father, who stared at the floor. I felt my chest tighten, memories flooding back: my grandma's laugh, the jingle of the bell above the door, the pride of seeing our name on every box. I couldn't let it die. I asked questions, trying to piece it together. How did it get this bad? Why didn't they tell me sooner? My father muttered about tough times, but my mother cut him off, saying they didn't want to burden me. I wasn't sure I believed her. There was a distance in her voice, like I was a guest, not their daughter. Before I could press, the door swung open and my brother Nathan stormed in. He was taller than I remembered, his jaw tight, his work apron streaked with flour. He didn't hug me, didn't even smile. "So the big shot's here to save us," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. I froze. Nathan and I had never been close, not since I left for college, while he stayed to help with the business. I thought he'd be glad I was here, but his eyes burned with something else, resentment maybe. He tossed a ledger onto the table, pages flapping open to rows of red ink. "This is what I've been dealing with," he said. "Years of no pay, no sleep while you were off living your fancy life." I tried to explain I didn't know that I'd have helped sooner, but he wasn't listening. My parents sat silent, letting his words hang. I opened the ledger, my hands shaking. It was a mess of numbers, but one column stood out: Nathan's hours, hundreds of them unpaid, stretching back years. My stomach twisted. Had I been so caught up in my own world that I missed this? I looked at my parents, hoping for some reassurance, but my mother just sighed. "We've all made sacrifices, Julia," she said. Her tone clipped. It felt like a slap. I wasn't asking for praise, just a sign we were in this together. Instead, I felt like an outsider, my years away, a mark against me. The smell of burnt sugar drifted in from the kitchen, sharp and wrong. I stood needing air and walked to the front of the shop. The walls were still lined with old photos, my grandparents at the grand opening, me as a kid holding a tray of cupcakes, but the warmth I'd expected was gone. Nathan's words echoed in my head, and my parents' silence stung deeper than I wanted to admit. I wasn't sure what I'd walked into, but it wasn't the homecoming I'd hoped for. Something was breaking, and I didn't know how to stop it. I stood by the bakery's front counter, my fingers tracing the chipped edge of the glass case. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence, but it couldn't drown out the ache in my chest. Nathan's accusation that I'd abandoned them burned, and my parents' lack of defense made it worse. I wanted to fix this to prove I belonged here. So I went back to the office, my resolve hardening. I'd give everything to save the bakery, to show them I was still part of this family. Back in the cramped room, my parents were sorting through bills, their faces grim. Nathan had left, probably to cool off in the kitchen. I took a deep breath and said, I can help. I have savings $5 million from my consulting work. It's enough to cover most of the debt. My mother's head snapped up, her eyes wide. My father leaned back, rubbing his temples. That's your money, Julia, he said, his voice low. You worked hard for it. But there was a flicker of hope in his tone, and I seized it. I want to do this, I insisted. This place is our legacy. Let me help. My mother nodded slowly, her lips tight like she was swallowing something bitter. My father just stared at a coffee stain on the table. They agreed, but there was no warmth, no relief, just a quiet acceptance that felt hollow. I told myself it was enough. I'd transfer the money tomorrow, and we'd rebuild together. That's what families do, I thought. Later that week, I met my best friend Hannah at a diner near my hotel. She was an accountant, sharp and no-nonsense, with a knack for seeing through people. Over greasy fries and milkshakes, I told her my plan. Her fork stopped mid-air. Julia, don't, she said, her voice firm. Mixing money with family is a recipe for disaster. I loaned my cousin $10,000 once. He never paid me back, and we haven't spoken since. I laughed it off, saying my family was different. We were bound by history, by the bakery's legacy. Hannah raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. I could tell she wasn't convinced, but I was too stubborn to listen. The money transfer went through the next day. I felt a strange mix of pride and fear as I watched my savings vanish. This was my chance to mend things, to be more than the daughter who left. I pictured us working side by side, laughing like we used to when I was a kid. That night, my parents invited me to a family dinner at their house to celebrate. I drove over, my stomach fluttering with hope. Maybe this was the turning point. The dining room was just as I remembered, same oak table, same faded curtains. But something felt off. My parents had set out a spread roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. But the mood was tense. Nathan sat across from me, picking at his food, his jaw tight. My mother passed the gravy, her smile forced. My father kept his eyes on his plate. I tried to lighten things up, talking about how we could rebrand the bakery, maybe update the menu. Nathan snorted. City money doesn't make you an expert, he said, his words dripping with scorn. I bit my lip, trying to stay calm. Then my mother spoke, her voice sharp. This doesn't mean you're one of us again, Julia. You can't just buy your way back. The room went still. My fork clattered against my plate. I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something, anything. He didn't. The air felt thick, like I was suffocating. I'd given them everything, my savings, my trust, and they were pushing me away. I noticed my old chair at the table was gone, replaced with a wobbly folding one that creaked under me. It was like they'd erased my place here. I mumbled an excuse and left early, my throat tight. Driving back to my hotel, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Hannah's warning echoed in my head, but it was too late. I'd poured my heart into this, and they'd thrown it back in my face. The bakery was saved, but at what cost? I felt like a fool, and worse, I felt alone. Something darker was brewing, and I wasn't sure I could face it. 6 months had passed since that awful dinner. and I was back at the bakery hoping time might have softened things. The place looked alive again. Customers lined up, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. My $5 million had worked. The debt was mostly gone, and the bakery was buzzing. I'd been in Chicago for a consulting gig, but I couldn't resist stopping by. Maybe I thought we could start over. Maybe they'd see me as more than a bank account now. I walked in my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, ready to offer help. I'd spent years building marketing campaigns for tech startups. I could do wonders for the bakery. The front counter was hectic staff darting between orders. I spotted Clara, a longtime employee who'd worked with my grandma. Her silver hair was tied back, and she gave me a warm smile, the kind that felt like home. "Julia, it's good to see you," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. I chatted with her for a bit, asking about the uptick in business. Her eyes flickered like she wanted to say more, but didn't. I found my father in the back, hunched over a stack of invoices. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to sound casual. "The place looks great. I was thinking I could help with marketing, maybe a new website, some social media." He barely looked up. "Nathan's got it covered," he said, his voice flat. "We're fine." I swallowed the sting. Nathan? He'd never touched a computer beyond checking email. I pressed, suggesting a quick campaign to draw in younger customers. My father waved me off. "We don't need that fancy stuff, Julia." Before I could argue, I heard Nathan's voice from the kitchen, loud and sharp. "She's not here to help. She's just a checkbook." My stomach dropped. I peeked through the doorway and saw him talking to a new hire, a young guy who nodded like he was hearing gospel. Nathan's words hit like a punch. I'd given everything to save this place, and he was painting me as some outsider who threw money at problems. My face burned, but I stayed quiet, not wanting a scene. Clara caught me lingering by the door. She pulled me aside, her voice low. "Julia, you should know something." She hesitated, glancing around like someone might overhear. "Your parents, they didn't use all that money for the bakery." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" I asked. She fidgeted, then said, "I saw paperwork. They bought a new car, fixed up their house. Things that weren't business expenses." Her words landed like bricks. My money, my life's work had gone to their personal wish list. I felt sick. I thanked Clara and slipped into the tiny break room to steady myself. The walls were bare except for a crooked bulletin board with staff schedules. I sat on a plastic chair, my mind racing. How could they? I'd trusted them, believed we were saving our legacy together. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, tempted to call Hannah and vent, but I needed answers, not sympathy. I marched back to the office where my mother was now with my father sorting mail. "Mom," I said, my voice tighter than I meant. "Is it true you used my money for personal stuff? A car. Your house." Her head jerked up, and for a second she looked caught. Then her face hardened. "Who told you that?" she snapped. "You're checking up on us now. After all we've been through." I stood my ground. "I gave you $5 million. I deserve to know where it went." She crossed her arms. "You left us years ago, Julia. Don't come back acting like you care about this family." Her words sliced through me. Left them, I'd built a life, not abandoned them. I wanted to scream, to demand receipts, but my father cut in. "Enough," he said, his voice heavy. "We're grateful, but this is our business, not yours." Grateful? They didn't even look at me like I was their daughter anymore. I turned and walked out, my chest tight with anger. The clatter of baking trays followed me, a mocking reminder of the warmth I'd come for. Something was rotting here, and I wasn't sure I could keep pretending it wasn't. I stumbled out of the bakery's office, my mother's words ringing in my ears. The accusation that I didn't care about the family cut deeper than I could process. My boots scuffed the worn linoleum as I headed for the exit, desperate for air. The chatter of customers and the ding of the cash register felt like a cruel backdrop to my unraveling. I pushed through the glass door, the bell jingling mockingly, and leaned against my rental car in the parking lot. The summer heat pressed against me, but I felt cold inside, like something vital was draining away. I pulled out my phone and called Hannah. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright until she heard mine. "Julia, what's wrong?" I spilled everything, Clara's warning my parents' deflection the way they turned my sacrifice into a weapon. Hannah listened, then sighed. "I told you money and family don't mix. You need to dig deeper. Ask Clara for proof." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Proof? That's what I needed to make sense of this betrayal. Back inside, I found Clara wiping down tables in the dining area. The lunch rush had slowed, leaving just a few stragglers sipping coffee. I sat across from her, my hands clasped tight to stop their shaking. "Clara, I need to know more," I said, keeping my voice low. "What else did you see?" She glanced toward the kitchen, then leaned in. "I found receipts in the office last month," she whispered. "They bought a new SUV, redid their kitchen, even took a trip to Florida." I didn't want to believe it, but the numbers don't lie. My throat tightened. A vacation? While I'd emptied my savings to save their business, I pressed her for details, and she described invoices tucked in a drawer labeled as miscellaneous expenses. My money years of late nights and client pitches had funded their new countertops and beach sunsets. I felt like I was sinking the ground beneath me crumbling. Clara reached for my hand, her fingers calloused from years of kneading dough. "I'm sorry, Julia," she said. "Your grandma would have been proud of you, but they—" She trailed off, her eyes sad. I couldn't speak. I just nodded and stood my legs unsteady. That night, I sat in my hotel room staring at the city skyline through a smudged window. I called Ethan, my boyfriend, needing an anchor. He was back in Seattle, working late as usual. When I told him about the receipts, his voice turned sharp. "They used you, Julia. You need to confront them, demand answers. Why are you letting them walk all over you?" His frustration stung like I was failing him too. I mumbled that I wasn't ready, that I needed time. He sighed, and the silence between us grew heavy. "I can't keep watching you do this to yourself," he said before hanging up. I stared at the phone, my chest aching. Even Ethan was slipping away. Desperate for clarity, I went to see Nathan the next day. He was unloading flour sacks in the bakery's back lot, sweat staining his shirt. I approached, hoping he'd be honest, maybe even an ally. "Nathan," I said, "did you know Mom and Dad used my money for their house, their car?" He dropped a sack dust, clouding the air, and laughed a bitter, jagged sound. "You're so naive," he said, wiping his hands. "You think you can waltz in with your cash and fix everything. I've been here, Julia, cleaning up their messes while you played big shot. You don't get to judge them." His words were a blade. I tried to argue, to explain how I'd given up my dreams for this, but he cut me off. "You left," he said, his eyes cold. "You don't belong here anymore." I noticed the glint of our grandfather's watch on his wrist, the one I'd thought was lost in a fire years ago. "Dad gave it to me," he said, catching my stare, "for staying." My breath caught. That watch was a piece of our history, and they'd handed it to him like I was nothing. I turned away, my vision blurring, and walked back to my car. I sat behind the wheel, gripping it until my hands hurt. My family wasn't just ungrateful, they were rewriting me out of our story. Every sacrifice I'd made felt like a lie, and Nathan's cruelty sealed it. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a transaction. The anger boiling inside me was new, raw, and terrifying. I didn't know what came next, but I couldn't keep swallowing this pain. Something had to give, and I was afraid it might be me. A year had passed since I'd given my parents the $5 million, and I was done waiting for them to see me. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence fueled by Clara's whispers and my own anger. Receipts, bank statements, even a few emails I'd gotten from a friend who worked at the county clerk's office. It all pointed to one truth: my parents had siphoned off my money for themselves. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was furious. I needed answers, and I wasn't leaving without them. I arranged a family meeting at the bakery, scheduling it after closing so we'd have privacy. The air was cool that October evening. The sky bruised with clouds as I pulled into the lot. The bakery's lights glowed faintly, casting shadows on the brick walls. I carried a folder of documents, my hands steadied despite the storm inside me. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect, about being seen as their daughter, not a cash machine. Inside the dining area was empty chairs stacked on tables. My parents were in the back office. Nathan slouched in a corner, scrolling on his phone. My mother looked up as I entered, her face tightening. "What's this about Julia?" she asked, her voice edged with suspicion. My father sat at the desk, his glasses perched low, a stack of order forms in front of him. I took a deep breath and set the folder down, the thud echoing in the small room. "I know what you did," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. I opened the folder, spreading out copies of receipts: $80,000 for a new SUV, $120,000 for a home renovation, $20,000 for a Florida trip, and more. You used my money, my savings, for this. $500,000 gone on things that had nothing to do with the bakery. My mother's eyes widened, then narrowed. My father's hands froze on the papers. Nathan snorted, but I ignored him, keeping my focus on my parents. For a moment, silence choked the room. Then my mother spoke, her voice low and shaky. "We had to, Julia. The business was killing us. We needed something for ourselves." My father nodded slowly, like he was admitting to forgetting my birthday, not stealing my future. "We were going to pay you back," he said when things stabilized. "Pay me back." I almost laughed. They'd never mentioned a loan, never hinted at repayment. My chest tightened, a mix of disbelief and rage. I pressed harder. "You took $500,000 without asking. You lied to me, let me think it was all for the bakery. Do you know what I gave up for this?" My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "I was going to start my own tech company. That money was my dream, and you used it for a new kitchen." My mother's face crumpled, tears welling up. "Don't you dare make us the villains," she said, her voice rising. "We've been fighting for this place while you were off living your perfect life." Her words were a gut punch. Perfect life. I'd worked 80-hour weeks, lived in a shoebox apartment, saved every dime for a future I believed in. I looked at Nathan, hoping for some shred of support, but he leaned forward, his eyes hard. "You're selfish, Julia," he said. "You think you're better than us, coming in here with your papers and accusations. This is our family, not your courtroom." His defense of them, after everything, felt like another betrayal. My father stood his chair, scraping the floor. "We're grateful for what you did," he said, but his tone was hollow, like he was reading a script. "But you can't come in here and tear us apart. Tear them apart. I was the one breaking, standing in a room full of strangers who wore my family's faces." I clutched the edge of the table, my nails digging into the wood. Clara was in the doorway, unnoticed by the others, her eyes glistening with sorrow. She'd seen this coming, but I hadn't listened. Now the truth was laid bare, and it was worse than I'd feared. I opened my mouth to speak, but my father's next words stopped me cold. My father's voice was steady, each word a hammer. "If you can't trust us, Julia, don't come back." The room spun. I gripped the table harder, my knuckles white, as if it could anchor me. "Don't come back. I'd poured my life into saving their bakery, and now they were cutting me out like I was nothing." My mother's tears had stopped. She stared at me, her face a mask of defiance. Nathan smirked, leaning back like he'd won something. Clara's quiet gasp from the doorway was the only sound of sympathy, but it felt miles away. I tried to speak, my voice trembling. "You're banishing me. After I gave up everything." I gestured at the folder papers spilling across the desk. "I trusted you. I thought we were family." My father's eyes flickered, but he didn't waver. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "We've got enough to deal with without you stirring up trouble." Trouble? I was their daughter, not some creditor they could dismiss. My mother stood her chair screeching against the floor. "You've humiliated us," she said, her voice sharp as glass, "parading these receipts like we're criminals. You think you're so perfect, don't you? Always were, even as a kid." Her words dug into old wounds, memories of being called selfish for wanting college, for leaving home. I'd thought those fights were buried, but here they were, weaponized. I felt Ethan shift beside me. He'd come for support, but now his presence felt like another weight. I could sense him itching to jump in, but I shook my head slightly. This was my fight, and I was losing. I tried one last time, my voice breaking. "I gave up my dream of starting a company. I gave you $5 million because I believed in us. How can you stand there and say I don't belong?" My mother's lips quivered, but she didn't answer. Nathan filled the silence. "You're not one of us, Julia," he said, his tone final. "You never were. You left, and we stayed. That's what family does." His words were a blade carving out any hope I'd clung to. I looked at my father, waiting for him to contradict Nathan, to say I was still his daughter. He didn't. He just adjusted his glasses and looked away. Ethan couldn't stay quiet anymore. "This is insane," he snapped, stepping forward. "She saved your business, and you're treating her like garbage." Nathan stood, squaring up to him. "Stay out of it, pretty boy," he growled. Their voices rose, a tangle of accusations, and I felt the room closing in. I'd brought Ethan to stand by me, but now their shouting was my fault too. My mother yelled at them to stop, her voice shrill, and in the chaos, a glass frame on the wall, a bakery award from years ago, fell shattering on the floor. The sound was a gunshot, silencing everyone. I stared at the broken glass, my reflection fractured in the shards. I wanted to scream to make them see me, but my throat was too tight. My family stood united against me, their faces a wall of rejection. Clara hovered in the doorway, her hands clasped, but she didn't speak. She couldn't save me from this. No one could. I'd laid bare my heart, my sacrifice, and they'd thrown it away. My legs felt weak, my chest hollow. I'd come here to reclaim my place, but instead, I'd lost everything: my family, my past, my trust. The bakery's walls, once a symbol of home, were a prison now, and I was trapped in their judgment with no way out. "3 months after my father's words banished me from the bakery, I was back in my Chicago apartment trying to piece myself together. The silence of that night still haunted me, the shattered frame, my mother's accusations, Nathan's smug dismissal. I'd left the bakery with Ethan, my hands shaking, and hadn't spoken to my family since. But I wasn't the same Julia who'd begged for their approval. Something had shifted. I was done being their scapegoat. I needed to take back what was mine, not just the money, but my dignity. My apartment was small, but it was mine, a sanctuary of soft gray walls and thrift store furniture. I sat at my kitchen table, a single lamp casting a warm glow over scattered notes and a cooling cup of tea. I'd been journaling, trying to make sense of the betrayal. The words poured out anger, grief, but also a spark of resolve. I couldn't let my parents' rejection define me. I had to act not for them, but for myself. I called Hannah the next morning. She'd been my rock checking in, even when I pushed her away. We met at a quiet coffee shop, the kind with mismatched mugs and folk music humming in the background. Over steaming lattes, I told her I was ready to fight. "I want my money back," I said, my voice steady. "Not all of it, but what they misused. It's not just about the cash, it's about them knowing they can't treat me like this." Hannah's eyes lit up a rare smile, breaking through her usual skepticism. Finally, she said, "You're standing up." She suggested a lawyer, someone she'd worked with on fraud cases. I hesitated, the idea of legal action feeling like a final cut to whatever threads still tied me to my family. But Hannah leaned forward, her voice firm. "You're not betraying them, Julia. They betrayed you. This is you saying you're worth more." She shared her own story again, how she'd set boundaries with her cousin after he refused to repay her loan. It hadn't fixed everything, but it gave her peace. Her words settled into me like a key turning in a lock. That afternoon, I met Rebecca, a lawyer with a no-nonsense bob and a handshake that meant business. Her office was a sleek contrast to the bakery's clutter-glass walls, polished wood, a view of the Chicago River. I laid out the story, the $5 million, the receipts, my parents' admission. Rebecca listened, jotting notes, her face unreadable. When I finished, she tapped her pen. "It's a tough case," she said. "Family loans are messy, and they'll argue it was a gift, but we can push for the misused funds. 500,000 is substantial. It'll take time, and it might get ugly." Ugly. The word hung heavy, but I nodded. I was ready for ugly if it meant reclaiming my voice. Rebecca suggested starting with a demand letter, formal, but not yet a lawsuit. I spent the next day drafting it with her, choosing words that were clear, but not cruel. I didn't want to destroy my parents, just make them see me. As I typed, I felt a quiet strength growing like a fire I hadn't known was there. I also started a blog, something I'd never done before. I called it The Cost of Trust, keeping it anonymous to protect my family's name. I wrote about giving too much, about learning to value yourself. It was raw, unpolished, but it felt right, a way to process the pain and maybe help others. The blog was my secret rebellion, a space where I could be honest without fear. I posted my first entry late at night, my fingers trembling as I hit publish. It was just a few paragraphs about sacrifice and betrayal, vague enough to shield details but true to my heart. By morning, a handful of strangers had commented, sharing their own stories of family greed or broken promises. Their words were a lifeline, reminding me I wasn't alone. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward, not just surviving. The letter was ready to send, and the blog was alive. I was done waiting for permission to matter. The demand letter went out the next week, a single page of precise words that felt like a line drawn in the sand. I mailed it, certified, my heart pounding as I handed it to the postal clerk. Back at my apartment, I refreshed my blog, stunned to see more comments pouring in. People I'd never met were sharing their stories, siblings who'd stolen inheritances, parents who'd demanded too much. Each one chipped away at my isolation, but the weight of the letter lingered. I was ready for a fight, but I wasn't sure what it would cost me. A few days later, my phone buzzed with Nathan's name. I hesitated, then answered, bracing myself. His voice was all edges. "You're suing us now. You think you're so high and mighty, dragging us through this?" I clenched my jaw, refusing to back down. "I'm not suing yet," I said. "I just want what's fair. You all used me, Nathan. I deserve better." He laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Good luck with that," he said, and hung up. His dismissal stung, but it also fueled me. I wasn't begging anymore. I needed closure, a way to say goodbye to the bakery on my terms. So I drove to the shop one last time, my pulse steady despite the memories flooding back. It was early, the parking lot empty, except for a delivery van. Inside, the air was warm, with the scent of rising dough. Clara was at the counter, her apron dusted with flour. When she saw me, her face softened. "Julia, she said you didn't have to come." I shook my head. I did. For me. We sat in the dining area, the morning light slanting through the windows. I told her about the letter, the blog, my need to stand up. She listened, her eyes kind but heavy with years of seeing too much. Then she stood and disappeared into the back, returning with a worn leather book, my grandma's recipe journal, its pages yellowed and stained. "This belongs with you," Clara said, pressing it into my hands. "She'd want you to have it, not them." My throat tightened as I traced the cover, feeling my grandma's spirit in every scribbled note. It was a piece of home they couldn't take. Holding that book, I felt a shift, like a knot loosening inside me. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for the girl who'd believed in family, who'd kneaded dough with her grandma and dreamed big. I thanked Clara, my voice thick, and left the bakery, the journal tucked under my arm. Driving away, I didn't look back. The shop's sign faded in my rear view, but I wasn't grieving anymore. I was claiming myself. Back home, I checked my blog again. It had exploded, hundreds of comments, shares, even an email from a local journalist named Miles who wanted to investigate my story. He'd seen patterns in family businesses, he wrote, and thought my case could shine a light. I hesitated, the idea of going public, both thrilling and terrifying. But then I thought of Nathan's laugh, my parents' silence, and the journal now on my kitchen table. I replied to Miles, agreeing to talk. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was bigger. That night, I sat with Ethan over takeout, the city humming outside my window. He'd been distant since the bakery fight, his frustration with my hesitation clear. I told him about the letter, the blog, the journalist. His eyes softened, and he reached for my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said, and for the first time in months, I believed him. But when he brought up marriage, I paused. "I need to protect myself," I said, my voice firm. "A prenup if we do this." He nodded, no argument, and I felt a quiet power settle in me. I stood and walked to the window, the journal in my hands. The Chicago skyline glittered, a reminder of the life I was building. I'd sent the letter, started the blog, held my grandma's legacy. Each step was a brick in a new foundation, one my family couldn't tear down. I set the journal on the sill, its weight a promise. I wasn't done fighting, but for the first time, I knew I was enough. I turned off the lamp and stood in the dark, my breath steady, my heart my own. 6 months after I sent the demand letter, my apartment had become a command center. My dining table was buried under legal documents, blog printouts, and coffee mugs I hadn't washed in days. The fight I'd started wasn't just about me anymore. It had taken on a life of its own. Miles, the journalist, had been digging into my parents' finances, and his article hit the local papers like a spark in dry grass. The headline was "Brutal Family Bakery, Saved by Daughter's Millions Spent on Luxury." My parents' names, the bakery's legacy, my sacrifice, all laid bare for Chicago to see. I'd known the article would sting, but I hadn't expected the fallout to be so swift. My phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, blog readers, strangers, even old high school friends reaching out with shock or support. I muted it and focused on work, but the weight of what I'd unleashed was heavy. The bakery faced boycotts almost overnight. Social media was ruthless posts calling my parents greedy, demanding they close shop. I scrolled through them late at night, my stomach twisting. I'd wanted accountability, not destruction. Then my parents called. It was a Sunday morning, the city quiet outside my window. I let it go to voicemail, my hands trembling as I poured coffee. My mother's voice crackled through the speaker, desperate and raw. "Julia, please," she said. "The bakery's falling apart. Customers won't come. We need your help." My father's voice chimed in softer, almost broken. "We're sorry. Okay? Just talk to us." I stared at the phone, my pulse loud in my ears. Sorry. After a year of silence, after banishing me now, they needed me again. I deleted the message, my fingers cold. I wasn't ready to hear them. The article wasn't the only shock. A letter arrived, slipped under my door like a secret. It was from Elise Nathan's ex-wife, someone I hadn't seen in years. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, and her words caught me off guard. She wrote that Nathan was spiraling, drinking too much, haunted by his role in pushing me away. "He knows he was wrong," she said. "He's too proud to admit it, but he's hurting." I sat on my couch, rereading her words, the paper crinkling in my hands. Nathan, the brother who'd called me selfish, was breaking. I didn't know whether to feel pity or rage. I met Rebecca, my lawyer, at her office the next day. The river outside her window glittered, but her news was grim. We'd won a partial settlement, $200,000 of the misused funds, but it was far less than I'd hoped. "They're claiming financial hardship," she said. Her voice clipped. "The bakery's losses from the boycott helped their case." I nodded, my jaw tight. The money felt hollow now, a fraction of what I'd lost, but it was proof they couldn't ignore me. Still, the victory tasted bitter, like ash in my mouth. Driving home, I passed the bakery's neighborhood, though I didn't stop. The streets were familiar, lined with maple trees turning gold in the fall light, but they felt like someone else's memory. I thought about my parents' voicemail, their plea for help. Part of me wanted to rush in to fix it like I always had. But another part, the one that had written the blog, sent the letter, faced the truth, knew I couldn't. They'd built this mess, not me. Yet the guilt gnawed sharp and relentless. Had I gone too far? The article, the boycott, Elise's letter, they were ripples I hadn't planned. And now they were drowning us all. I pulled into my parking garage, the engine's hum fading to silence. My hands rested on the wheel, but I didn't move. The world was shifting, and I'd set it in motion. My parents' desperation, Nathan's guilt, the bakery's collapse. It was all real, and it was all mine to carry. I closed my eyes, the weight of their voices, their choices, my choices pressing down. I wasn't sure what came next, but the silence in that moment was louder than any scream. I sat in my car for a long time, the garage's dim lights casting shadows across the dashboard. The settlement money was a start, but it didn't fill the hole my family had left. I decided to use it to fund a dream. I'd buried, a small tech startup focused on helping small businesses with digital tools. I named it Rooted, a quiet nod to the bakery's legacy, but built on my terms. The work was grueling, late nights coding, pitching to investors, but it felt like breathing again, like I was carving out a space where I belonged. Then Nathan showed up. It was a gray afternoon rain tapping my apartment windows. I opened the door to find him standing there, his jacket, soaked eyes bloodshot. He looked smaller, like the fight had gone out of him. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice rough. I let him in, my guard up, and we sat across from each other at my kitchen table. The air was thick, the hum of the fridge the only sound. "I'm sorry," he said, finally staring at his hands. I was angry. At you, at them, at everything. I shouldn't have pushed you out. I waited for relief, but it didn't come. His apology was a crack in the wall, but it didn't erase the years of resentment, the watch he wore, the way he'd stood with our parents. "Why now?" I asked, my voice even. He rubbed his face, exhausted. "Elise told me about her letter. She said I needed to face what I did. And the bakery. It's dying, Julia." I can't carry it alone." His eyes met mine, pleading, but I felt distant, like I was watching a stranger. I wanted to believe him, but trust was a muscle I'd overworked. "I hear you," I said, "but I don't know if I can do this again." He nodded, like he'd expected it, and left without another word. The door clicked shut, and I stood there, the weight of his visit settling like dust. I'd spent so long craving his regret, but now it just felt empty, another piece of a family I couldn't fix. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet my parents a week later. They'd called again, their voices softer, promising a real conversation. We met at a diner across town, neutral ground, with vinyl booths and flickering fluorescent lights. They sat side by side, looking older, their coffee untouched. My mother spoke first, her hands twisting a napkin. "We messed up," she said. "We should have been honest about the money. But you hurt us too, Julia, with that article." My father added, "The bakery's barely hanging on. You wanted to destroy us." I stared at them, my fork still in my hand. Destroy them? I'd expose their choices, not burn the place down. "I wanted you to see me," I said, my voice low. "I gave you everything, and you threw me out." My mother's eyes glistened, but she didn't argue. My father just sighed, his shoulders heavy. The diner's chatter filled the silence, and I realized they weren't here to make amends. They were here to blame me, to pull me back into their chaos. I paid for my coffee and left their faces a blur behind me. Later, I learned Clara had quit the bakery. She'd opened a tiny cafe downtown using my grandma's recipes. I drove by one evening, the windows glowing with string lights, a chalkboard sign listing her specials. It wasn't grand, but it was hers, and it felt like a small, defiant victory, a piece of our legacy living on without my parents' shadow. I didn't stop, but I smiled, the first real one in weeks. Back at my apartment, I sat on the floor, the settlement check on the coffee table. Rooted was taking shape, but this moment wasn't about triumph. My parents' accusations, Nathan's hollow apology, the bakery's slow death, they were chains I'd helped forge. I'd fought for justice, but the cost was a family I barely recognized. I folded the check and tucked it away, my breath shallow. The rain outside had stopped, leaving only a quiet drip. I closed my eyes, letting the stillness swallow me, not ready to move, not yet. A year after the article shook everything apart, I stood in a rented loft downtown, the air buzzing with chatter and clinking glasses. My startup Rooted was launching tonight, and the room was alive, investors in sharp suits, coders in hoodies, friends who'd become family. I was 33 now, and this moment felt like a bridge between who I'd been and who I was becoming. The loft's exposed brick walls glowed under string lights, and a long table held trays of pastries, a quiet tribute to my past. I'd come far from the bakery's shadow, but I carried its lessons in my bones. I adjusted my blazer, my hands steady as I prepared to speak. The crowd hushed, their faces a mix of curiosity and warmth. "Thank you for being here," I began, my voice clear. Rooted isn't just a tech platform. It's about giving small businesses a chance to thrive, about building something that lasts. I didn't mention my parents or the $5 million I'd lost, but the weight of that choice threaded through my words. I spoke about resilience, about finding strength when the ground shifts beneath you. The room listened, and for the first time in years, I felt seen not as a victim, but as a woman who'd carved her own path. Hannah stood near the front, her arms crossed, a proud smile tugging at her lips. She'd joined Rooted as my business partner, her accounting skills grounding my vision. After the speech, she pulled me aside, her eyes bright. "You were incredible," she said, handing me a glass of sparkling water. "I knew you had this in you." I laughed, the sound lighter than I expected. "You believed in me before I did?" I said. She shrugged, but her gaze softened. "You reminded me I could fix things with my own family," she added. "I called my cousin last month. We're talking again." Her words landed gently, a reminder that my fight had rippled outward, touching others in ways I hadn't foreseen. The crowd milled around, sampling pastries and demoing our app on tablets scattered across the room. I circulated, shaking hands, answering questions, but my mind wandered to a small display I'd set up in the corner. My grandma's recipe journal sat open on a wooden stand, its pages turned to her cinnamon roll recipe. I'd brought it to honor her, not the bakery, a way to reclaim the love she'd poured into me, without the pain my parents had tied to it. Guests paused to read it, some smiling at the handwritten notes, and I felt a quiet pride. This was my legacy now, not theirs. As the night wore on, I heard whispers that my parents had shown up. I caught a glimpse of them near the entrance, my mother in a navy coat, my father's shoulders hunched. They didn't approach me, and I didn't go to them. Their presence stirred something, not anger, but a dull ache, like pressing a faded bruise. They left early, slipping out before I could decide what to feel. I stood by the journal, my fingers brushing its cover, and let the moment pass. I wasn't chasing them anymore. This night, this work, this life, it was mine, and they couldn't touch it. I stepped outside for air, the Chicago wind sharp against my face. The city stretched before me, a tapestry of lights and lives. I leaned against the building, my breath visible in the cool night. Rooted was real growing, and I was too. The hurt hadn't vanished, but it wasn't the loudest thing in me anymore. I closed my eyes, letting the city's hum fill the silence. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, and that was enough. The launch party faded into a soft hum behind me as I stood outside, the city's pulse steady under my feet. I went back inside, weaving through the crowd, their laughter a gentle current. But my mind was elsewhere, tugging me toward a quieter call. The next day, I drove to Clara's Cafe, a small brick storefront tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. I'd been meaning to visit since I heard she'd opened it, but something had held me back. Maybe fear it wouldn't feel like home. Now I was ready to find out. Clara's Cafe was warm, the air thick with the scent of butter and vanilla. Wooden tables were scattered across a polished floor, each holding a tiny vase of wildflowers. She was behind the counter, her silver hair loose, a flower-dusted apron tied around her waist. When she saw me, her face broke into a smile that felt like sunlight. "Julia," she said, coming around to hug me. "I was hoping you'd come." Her embrace was firm, grounding, like she'd been waiting for me all along. We sat at a corner table, and she brought over a plate of scones, their edges golden and crisp. "Made with your grandma's recipe," she said, her voice soft with pride. I took a bite, and the taste, lemon zest, and a hint of cardamom pulled me back to childhood mornings, my grandma's hands guiding mine as we mixed batter. Clara watched me, her eyes knowing. "This place is my way of keeping her alive," she said. "And you? You're doing the same, just your own way." I nodded, my throat tight. She was right. Rooted the journal, my fight. They were all threads of the same cloth, woven from love and loss. Clara poured us tea, the cups steaming in the afternoon light. We talked about small things, her new recipes, my startup's first clients, but then she paused, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a photograph creased and faded and slid it across the table. It was me at 5, standing on a stool in the bakery's kitchen, my face smeared with icing, my grandma laughing beside me. "Found it in the attic when I left," Clara said. "Thought you should have it." My fingers trembled as I held it. The image, a snapshot of a time when family felt unbreakable. I stayed longer than I planned, helping Clara in the kitchen. We rolled dough for her evening batch, our hands moving in quiet rhythm. The work was simple, but it steadied me, each knead a small act of reclaiming what I'd loved about the bakery before it became a battlefield. As we worked, I told her about Ethan, about the prenup I'd insisted on. "It's not about distrust," I said, shaping a loaf. "It's about knowing I can stand on my own." Clara nodded, her hands steady. "You've learned what matters," she said. "That's more than most." Driving home, I kept the photo on the passenger seat, its edges curling slightly. Ethan was waiting at my apartment, his suitcase packed for a work trip. We sat on the couch talking about our future, the prenup now, a signed agreement between us. "I'm in," he said, his hand finding mine. "Whatever you need." I smiled, the warmth of his words settling into me. I wasn't afraid anymore, not of love, not of losing myself. I'd built something stronger than fear. Later alone, I taped the photo to my fridge, its place deliberate, a quiet anchor in my daily life. The city outside was still, the skyline a soft glow against the dusk. I stood at my window, my breath fogging the glass. The ache of my family's betrayal hadn't vanished, but it was quieter now, a shadow that didn't block the light. I'd found my footing, not in their approval, but in the life I was shaping. I closed my eyes, the world soft and still, and let myself rest in that truth. 3 years have passed since I walked away from the bakery for good, and I'm 35 now, sitting in my Chicago apartment, a place that's finally starting to feel like home. The walls are painted a soft blue, my choice, after years of renting blank spaces. A small bookshelf holds novels and tech manuals, a mix of who I am and who I'm becoming. Outside, the city hums, but inside, it's just me, a cup of chamomile tea, and a notebook where I've been writing letters I'll never send. I started this habit a few months ago after Rooted took off, and the chaos of the startup settled into a steady rhythm. The letters are to my parents, sometimes to Nathan, but mostly to the version of myself who thought love meant giving everything. I write about the bakery, the $5 million, the way their rejection carved me open. But I also write about the days that followed, how I learned to cook for myself again, how I planted herbs on my balcony, how I let myself laugh without checking for their approval. The pages are messy ink smudged from late nights, but they're mine, a map of where I've been and where I'm going. This morning, I wrote about forgiveness, not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that lets you carry it differently. I don't hate my parents anymore. I don't hate Nathan. I see them clearly now, flawed human caught in their own fears. I used to think forgiving them meant inviting them back, but I've learned it's about setting myself free. I keep the letters in a wooden box under my bed, each one a step toward peace, a way to let go without losing who I am. My days have a rhythm now, one I've built piece by piece. I wake early, jog along the lakefront as the sun rises, the water glinting like a promise. Rooted is growing, helping dozens of small businesses with our app, and I spend my hours coding, meeting clients, dreaming bigger. But I also make time for quiet things, reading on my couch, calling Hannah to laugh about nothing, sketching ideas in a journal that's not about work. These moments aren't grand, but they're solid like stones in a riverbed, shaping the current of my life. I've changed in ways I didn't expect. I used to measure myself by what my family thought, by their nods or silences. Now I measure by what feels true. I bought a bike last month, a secondhand one with a red frame, and I ride it through the park on weekends, the wind sharp against my face. It's not about escaping anymore. It's about being here in my body, in my city, in my choices. I'm not whole yet. Maybe no one ever is, but I'm not broken either. Ethan and I are planning a small wedding next spring, just close friends and a quiet ceremony by the lake. The prenup is signed a practical choice that feels like love, not doubt. He's been my partner through this, not by fixing me, but by staying steady while I found my way. I think about that a lot, how love isn't about saving someone, but about standing beside them while they save themselves. I close my notebook and sip my tea, the steam curling in the lamplight. The city outside is alive, but I'm content in this small space, this life I've stitched together. The bakery, my parents' words, the years of hurt, they're part of me, but they don't own me. I set the cup down, my hands still, and let the quiet settle. For the first time, I'm not running, not fighting, just here, breathing whole enough for now. Yesterday, I took my bike to a farmer's market near the lake, the kind with canvas tents and baskets of bright produce. I wandered the stalls, picking out tomatoes and a loaf of crusty bread, the morning sun warm on my shoulders. A woman selling honey caught my eye. Her hands weathered, her smile easy. We talked for a while, not about much bees, the weather, the way fresh bread makes a house feel alive. As I left, she pressed a small jar of wildflower honey into my hands. No charge. "For your kindness," she said. I walked away, the jar heavy in my bag, my heart lighter than it had been in years. That moment stayed with me, a quiet reminder of what I've learned. Life isn't about grand gestures or forcing people to see you. It's about these small exchanges, the ones that ask nothing in return. I used to think family was a debt you paid with everything, money, dreams, your own worth. But I was wrong. Family, like any bond, thrives on respect, not obligation. My parents and Nathan taught me that, not by their love, but by its absence. They showed me what happens when you give too much to people who don't value it. And in that pain, I found something stronger myself. I don't write the letters as often now. The wooden box under my bed is full, a testament to the years I spent untangling my heart. Last week, Nathan texted asking to meet. He's in therapy, he said, trying to face his mistakes. I agreed, not out of hope for a perfect ending, but because I'm curious about who we might be now. I don't need his apology to be whole, but I'm open to hearing it. That's new for me, choosing connection without expectation, letting people be flawed without letting them define me. My balcony herbs are thriving, their green tips brushing my fingers when I water them. I cook with them most nights, simple meals that fill my apartment with the scent of basil and thyme. It's a ritual, one that grounds me in the present. I think about my grandma often, not just her recipes, but her quiet strength, the way she loved without losing herself. I'm learning to do the same, to hold space for others while keeping my own steady. The lesson I carry now is simple, though it took years to learn. Your worth isn't tied to what you give away. It's in how you choose to live, how you show up for yourself when the world turns cold. I gave my family $5 million, but the real cost was believing their love was my measure. I've forgiven them not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness isn't a gift you hand out. It's a door you open to set yourself free. I keep a recipe card from my grandma's journal on my desk, not the one I used to clutch, but a new one for her peach cobbler. It's framed now, a reminder of roots that run deeper than betrayal. I look at it when I work, when I doubt, when I need to remember who I am. It's not about the past anymore. It's about the woman I'm becoming. One choice, one meal, one morning at a time. What's the hardest lesson you've learned about love or family? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story. If this journey of mine spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need it. Thank you for listening, for being here with me. Here's to healing, to finding your own light, and to carrying on with grace.